Hello, my name is Eric Peña. Like Stacey said, I'm an intern at OCH Habitats. I'm also a student at UC Irvine. I'm hoping to graduate this June with a bachelor's degree in environmental science and policy. I'm looking to build my career around ecological restoration, and that's primarily because of my love of plants. And today, I'm very lucky to be able to talk to you all about exactly that, plants. We'll be talking about specifically coastal dune plants. So, as a quick overview, what I'll be going over is, I'll start by explaining what coastal dune habitats and plants are. And then I'll be describing plant adaptations that coastal dune plants commonly share. And I'll be giving an overview of what common native species you can find, as well as invasive species that are present in coastal dune habitats. And then I'll be talking about threats to coastal dune habitats and the plants and what you can do about that. So coastal dune habitats. I guess you can type in the chat, or I think there's a raise, either type in your chat or you can say out loud, but how many of you have been to a coastal dune habitat? Okay, a few people. So how many of you have been to a beach before? You can either raise your hand or type in the chat as well. Okay, awesome, some more people. So if you've been to the beach, there's a really good chance that you've actually been to a coastal dune habitat. Coastal dune habitats are habitats that consist of dunes or mounds of sand that are created by the wind coming from onshore direction onto the beaches. And coastal dune habitats are located all throughout the California coast. And you can find these in 6 beaches in Orange County. These beaches include Seal Beach, Bolsa Chica, Huntington Beach, San Clemente, and Chessels. And these coastal dune habitats are in marine protected areas as well. These habitats are experiencing constant changes and have seen major habitat degradation since the 1800s. And that's because of human development, as well as other impacts. All beaches used to have coastal dune habitats, but because they have been historically seen as unattractive or useless, most of them have actually been destroyed. And that's problematic. That's because coastal dunes are really important. These dunes act as natural barriers against sea level rise and storm surge, and they offer home to a variety of plant species and animal species. And that does include endangered and threatened bird species like the western snowy plover and California beast tern. They also hold a really unique relationship with plant species as well. What are coastal dune plants? Coastal dune plants are salt-tolerant plant species that are adapted to harsh environments like sand dunes. And they're important because they provide food and shelter to animals. And they stabilize the dune system with the wind with their roots. And they also help protect the beach from erosion. Coastal dune plants share a lot of common characteristics that allow them to thrive in like a really harsh environment like this desert-like coastal dune. So as a question to all of you, and again, you can unmute or type it in the chat your guesses, but what is the most common reason why plants don't survive? Okay, coastal development, that's a really good guess. Does anybody have any other factors? Human factors, it's not number one, but it's definitely a problem. Are there any other guesses? Pollution is also a problem. It's not the number one cause though. And I'm talking generally plants, just plants in general.
Oh, when they don't get enough water?
Exactly, yes. Water is the biggest reason. And that does include like not enough water or too much water. And so coastal dune plants actually have they experience different threats than normal plants. And this is because coastal dune plants are adapted to survive with very little water. But they face other threats like human impacts, that does include urban development and beach grooming and trampling. They're also occupied by invasive species, which is particularly problematic for Orange County. One example of these species include the invasive ice plant, and they also deal with pollution, rising sea levels, and climate change. And they're like us in that they can be sunburned, so being overexposed to the sun does prevent them from surviving as well. So next we'll be going over common characteristics and adaptations that native plants have. A lot of them actually look a little bit similar to one another, and that's because they need to have specific traits to be able to survive in a really harsh environment. So with color, many coastal dune plants actually have leaves that are very light green or gray, and that's to reflect sunlight and prevent desiccation, which means drying out. Some coastal dune plants have hairy leaves. They can be covered with like these tiny sticky hairs that intentionally trap sand onto the leaves. And this helps increase its surface area and overall decrease its water loss. And it does this because when different areas of the leaf is covered by sand, that allows for different parts of the leaf to be exposed to different rates of photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is a process where plants use sunlight to synthesize food from carbon dioxide and water. And changing this rate of photosynthesis allows the plant to increase the amount of stomata. So stomata are these tiny pores inside plant leaves that lets carbon dioxide go in and oxygen go out. It also lets water go in and out. And having stomata is really important because that allows plants to hold more water, which is what these plants want. The hairs, they're not actually hairs, they're called multicellular trichomes, but they're not like our hair at all. Some plants don't have these hairs. Some of them have like succulent or fleshy leaves, and this is to prevent water from. Oops, there we go. This is to prevent water from escaping and for it to overall retain more soil moisture. A lot of these plants are actually low growing as well. They're very short, and this is to protect the plant from fast winds. And they all have similar root systems in that they have this deep taproot, and a taproot is like the main root of a plant that goes downward, and that allows more plants to spread horizontally out of this one main taproot. These roots allow the plant to anchor onto the sand and prevent them from blowing away from the fast winds. And it also helps them prevent sand erosion. Deep taproots also can access deeper water sources to address low water availability, but this might not be the case for a lot of coastal dune habitats. So now I'll be going over a few examples of native coastal dune plant species that you can find. This is just a brief overview and of a few common plants. It does not encompass all coastal dune plants that you can find, but I'll be going over native species, and right after I'll be going over invasive species as well. So our first one is the beach evening primrose, the scientific name Camiseniopsis chironthifolia. These are perennial low-growing plants. Perennial means that the plant can live multiple years. There you have perennial plants and you have annual plants. Annual plants live for usually 1 year. They have leaves that are shaped like ovals, but they have these tiny leaves that are shaped like ovals with wavy ledges. They also have these tiny blue hairs on their grayish leaves, and that's to help retain moisture and prevent and reflect sunlight. They also bloom these beautiful tiny yellow flowers, which you can't see these in these pictures, but a lot of them have these red dots at their base. And this species is mostly pollinated by moths at night. They're usually shorter than 5 inches tall. These are the shortest plants that we will be talking about today. But next we have beach morning glory, the scientific name Calistegia soldanella. They are also low-green plants. They have hairless, fleshy leaves, and that's to retain soil moisture. A lot of people say that the leaves are shaped like kidneys. I think they're shaped like hearts. That's why they're one of my favorites. And they can grow up 2 feet tall. We also have the coast woolly heads, scientific name Mimicaliosis dunura var dunata. These are listed as endangered by the state, and that's because of habitat loss as well as trampling. A lot of people look at this plant and think it's dead because of how small and dried up it looks, but it's very much alive. A lot of coastal dune plants look gray and misshapen and sad, but they are alive. And this is an annual plant. It's actually a form of buckwheat, and they have these leaves that are covered in white woolly hairs. Their flowers turn from a greenish white to a red, and they can grow up to 1.3 feet tall. Next, we have the beach burr, scientific name Ambrosia camiseniasis. They are a perennial herb, and an herb is a herb is a seed-bearing plant that does not have a woody stem and dies down after it flowers. These are often eaten by caterpillars, butterflies, and moths, and that includes the Ambrosia plume moth that can be found in Orange County. They have these leaves that are toothed and pinnately lobed, which means that the leaves are arranged on each side like a feather. They have stems that are covered in silvery hair, and their fruits are brown with sharp spines, and that's an adaptation to protect its own seeds. And this also helps the seeds grab onto other animals so that the seed can travel far and disperse. They're also very painful to touch and step on, so please avoid stepping on these if possible. They are very sharp. Next, we have the dune buckwheat, scientific name Eurygonium parvifolium. This one's very hard to pronounce. They are a perennial herb as well. They support pollinators like butterflies and bees. In particular, they support the locally endangered El Segundo blue butterfly. These are locally endangered in Orange County, but you can find these butterflies in a lot of areas like LA. They have leaves that are green with red tinges, and flowers that are white to pink, and these can grow up to 3.3 feet tall. Next, we have saltgrass, scientific name Disticus spicata. They are a perennial grass, and they can form these long monotypic stands, and that means that like a monotypic stand is an area of just like all one species. They have leaves that secrete salts from tissues via salt glands, and so oftentimes you can see these just covered in salt, and that's an adaptation to deal with salt water that you could always find at the beach. They have these tiny flowers that are bright pinkish purple, and these can grow up to 3 feet tall. Lastly, we have the pink verbena, scientific name Ambonia umbulata. They have these leaves with sticky tipped hair, and their leaves actually move along with the sun, and they try to stay vertical to avoid being exposed too much to the sun and prevent being sunburned. They have these pink flowers that are umbrella shaped. I really like how when they're closed, they're like a closed umbrella, and when they open, they're like an open umbrella. I think that's really cute. One interesting thing to note is that pink verbena can actually be really problematic for coastal dune habitats, and that's because of their sticky leaves. Young juvenile birds like the snowy plovers can actually get caught and like stuck and trapped and not survive. And so actually, areas like Bolsa Chica have removed these native species to promote the lives of endangered and listed species of birds. They're also currently doing this at San Diego, but I think this is a really important note to point out, because even though this is a native species can actually be really problematic as well, even if they're not like exotic or non-native. So these are all the native species that we talk. I'd love to know, you can type it in the chat or say it out loud, but which one, if you have a favorite, which one is your favorite? I think my favorite is the beach morning glory. And it's because I love their flowers. I love flowering plants. I think it's the way that it opens and the star it forms at its center is just absolutely beautiful. The primrose is really cool too. Yeah, those bloom from April to October, and they're called an evening primrose because when they bloom at night. The flower opens up at night, and that allows like a lot of night insect species to pollinate it. I think the dune buckwheat is really cool too. You can like if you plant these in your garden in the summer, you like after they flower, you don't have to water them for the entire summer. They're really cool. So like the coastal heads, they bloom from March to August. But thank you for everyone for telling me your favorites. Yeah, I think they're all really cool. Next, we'll be going over invasive plant species. So invasive species are typically non-native species that have been introduced to a different environment, and they cause harm to the environment. Oftentimes with invasive plant species, they aren't intentionally planted, but they manage to find new ways to invade an area, like via the wind or water to disperse the seeds, or even sometimes accidentally catching on to a lot of animals or even like humans' clothes. But they're typically not like intentionally spread, but for some cases they are. So here's like a quick overview of some of the invasive plant species that you can see in coastal dune habitats in Orange County. We have the ice plant. In particular, what's shown here is the Copperbrotus edulis. You can find 8 different species of ice plant all throughout Orange County, but this species was introduced from South Africa. It was planted alongside a lot of coastal dune habitats in the 1900s because it was thought that it could stabilize the soils, which it was really great at preventing soil erosion. However, they because their roots are so good at attaching it to soils and sands, they drastically change mounds and increase slopes, and that's really problematic for ecosystems. Because of the way their roots grow, they also can create these really long mats, and that prevents native species from being able to grow alongside them. They have these really pretty succulent flowers, and they're commonly used in landscapes because of how beautiful they are. We also have the European beach grass, the scientific name Amaphilia arenaria. They are a perennial plant with light green leaves. It's this plant right here. They're also similar to ice plant in that they were brought over to stabilize soils, but they drastically change sound mounds and create steep mounds as well, sorry. And that also alters dune systems, so they're a lot similar to, their impact is very similar to ice plants in that. Native plants are also not able to compete with their dense stands that they are able to create. And lastly, we have the European sea rocket, scientific name Cacao maritama. They are a succulent plant and they are a member of the mustard family. They have these pink white flowers. They're really small, but these flowers produce seed pods. While they're invasive, they're not as problematic as the other two. But through their seeds, they're able to spread like through water, through wind, and through humans. And because they're able to produce so many seeds, that's how they're able to outcompete native species. And they're really good at dispersing into great distances and tolerating a lot more disturbances than native plants. Yeah, those are just a few. There are more invasive species, but those are some common ones that you can usually find. And lastly, we'll be talking about threats to coastal dune habitats. These habitats are really vulnerable. And unfortunately, nearly all of California's coastal dunes have been degraded. That's largely because of human encroachment, where, like I said before, they've historically been seen as wastelands and not valued during development. And so a lot of them have been just completely entirely removed. And you see a lot of houses next to beaches, and it's like a lot of flat. A lot of people think like a beach is supposed to look flat, but it's actually supposed to have a lot of mounds and dunes and coastal dune habitats. They've also experienced a lot of degradation, which is problematic because it makes it difficult for shorebirds to safely nest, and it removes a lot of native plants, which we know is the base of many ecosystems. There's also a lot of pollution and climate change and rising sea levels that physically shift and destroy these habitats and all the wildlife. And it disturbs all the wildlife that lives in them. Luckily, there are some things that you can do though. A few things that you can keep in mind include being mindful of where you step. Some birds, like the western snowy plover and the California leastern, lay eggs right on the sand that blend really well into these little sand mounds, and they could be easily stepped on if you're not looking. If you see a plant and it looks dead and it's gray, it's probably still alive. But in the chance that you step on it, a lot of native plants actually have a really hard time recovering from being trampled. So it's always important, just look where you're going. Another way you can make a difference is avoiding planting invasive species in your own gardens. A lot of nurseries do sell ice plants, but one thing you can do is, other than not planting these plants, is asking your local nurseries to carry more native plants and native plant seeds. And lastly, again, OCH Habitats has volunteer opportunities where every month they send out coastal dune habitat monitors, where these monitors go to the beaches all across Orange County and do surveys and record data on what species are present to keep an eye on how populations are doing. OCH Habitats also does field trips and to beaches, and they do marine protected hikes, and that all educates the public about these habitats, which is really important. And that's all we have. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any more questions about coastal dune plants or coastal dune habitats, please email us at ochhabitats.org. We also have a website, and you can follow us on social media at OCH Habitats on all these platforms. If anybody has a question or comments for discussion, please go for it. But yeah, thank you so much for listening.